All right, AP Human Geography students, it is time for your first summative assessment. So let's do a bit of reviewing before you take on that very first big challenge. First of all, the format of the exam is going to be 55 questions, and that's 55 points. 25 of them will be multiple choice, 5 will be true false, you'll have 10 matching. A lot of those are going to be visuals, and you're going to have 15 vocabulary, right? And that's going to be 15 of the 20 that were on your pre-test. Keep in mind that there is no free response question or FRQ or writing or essay question this time around, right? But it will be coming on subsequent exams. All right, here's some tips to help you study, right? These are in no particular order. Things that you should do. One, you should hit that vocabulary, right? It is 15 vocabulary words. You know what they are. They should be fairly straightforward for you, right? You should use the review sheet that you have. That's been given to you. You should look over your guided reading. Are all the questions answered well? You could reread your book. You could retake the 2 formative quizzes for practice, right? And again, remember, even if you do worse on your retakes, your highest score still counts in the grade book. All right, let's talk a little bit about maps and start with that. So first of all, geography, right, is the 2 essential questions is why and where, right? Sometimes we call geography the why of where, right? So we're answering where things are and why they are where they are. You can see it's ancient origins. Go back to the Greek Eratosthenes. We look at some basic concepts here. Identifying the location of important places. That's fairly straightforward. It explains why one human activity is found near another or in another place. Again, we're asking why and where. We're going to look at basic concepts of organizing material spatially. How can you figure out how it works within space and distance, things like that. All right, and then you also need to be able to recognize that an action on one point of Earth can result from actions on another point, that there are connecting points there, right? And we can consequently affect conditions elsewhere. All right, so you'll see kind of a global effect in this, right, and how things in one spot affect you, right, either on a local or a state level, or a national or a global level. All right, so let's talk about the basics of map. First thing, a straightforward definition: cartography, which is the science or art of map making. Keep in mind that maps are real scale models of the world, and we use them to refer to things, right? You would refer to it as in getting from point A to point B, like a treasure map or a road map, right? But we also use them as a communications tool to describe where things are located, why they're located, how much density there is, tons of other things like that. All right, so there it looks like a reference tool, kind of your roadmap, and here it is as a communications tool. Also, this is of the same place, right? This is metro area. But it's not something you would use to get from point A to point B. All right, a couple things you want to know. You want to know a little bit about GIS, right? Geographic Information Systems. They are computerized mapping. That's one thing. You're going to look at this kind of the GI science, the overall piece of this. You're going to look at GPS, right, which is the goal positioning system. You think about that. You have that on your phone. You have that on your in your cars, that type of thing. This is absolute location. It's using location. That is, it's not relative. It's not changing. It's not any of that stuff. It is absolute. And then don't forget remote sensing as well, which is satellite-based mapping. Sometimes it's taken from space, sometimes it's taken from planes, things like that. So understand a little bit about what those are. So there's GIS. Keep in mind that they are layers, right? You see all of these things combined and you get this, right? So this landforms and the highways and the cities, all of those things combine in here. You can take a vector out and you can put a vector in, and so it is fairly sophisticated, and you can get a lot of data in one spot. All right, scale is another important thing. Understanding the difference between large scale maps and small scale maps. What a large scale map is and what a small scale map is. Keep in mind scale, the definition is the relationship between the size on the map and the size on the Earth. All right, the two things that you really got to worry about here are the level of detail and the amount of area that your map is covering. All right, also keep in mind that scale can be expressed three different ways. All right, so you have a ratio, which is a one, so you can look at it here, it says 1 to 15,000, which means if you blew this up 15,000 times, so if it was, you know, it would cover the exact area that you are mapping, right? You can look at it as written as 1 inch equals 1/4 mile. And then you can see that it also exists as a graphic, right? Understanding, right? Large scale and small scale, right? So a large scale map shows a large amount of detail over a small amount of area. So example would be your neighborhood or a city. Would be a good example of a small scale map, right? Or I'm sorry, a large scale map. See, even I get it confused, right? A small scale map, on the other hand, shows a lot less detail, a small amount of detail over a large amount of area. Your world maps are going to be examples of that. All right, so which one has the larger scale? Remember, large scale, large amount of detail. So which one has the most detail? That would be the one on the left, right? But it also, remember, a larger scale covers a small amount of area. This one on the right is a smaller scale map compared to this one because it has less detail, right? Smaller detail, but remember, it does cover a large amount of area. Don't get those two confused, please. All right, on to another key concept is we have projection. All right, so projection is how a map is converted, right, from a globe, if you will, onto a paper, right, for a map. Right. Keep in mind the only true model on Earth is a globe, and that all maps have distortion. Right. We look at the 4 different types of distortion you can look at: shape and size, direction, and distance all matter there. We look at projection types, like how it's projected up, things like that. All right, keep in mind that you're going to find distortion more on small scale maps because they stretch out over a larger amount of area. All right, so there is your planar and your conical and your cylindrical types of classes right there. We look at different types of distortion. Again, you can see size really looking at here when you have the Mercator map, right? Africa looks much smaller here than it does in the Gauss-Peter. We look at the Miller cylindrical right here, and we look at how big Antarctica is. You'll see a lot of fraying on the edges. All right, you will see on your test, you're going to definitely see a Mercator. You're going to see the goods. You're going to see not the Robinson, but the Winkle map, and you will maybe see a mnemonic map as well. All right, so there's a Mercator projection. Again, we look at that and we see the distortion on the sides. Right? It's that size is really, really distorted. What's good about it, though, is that it direction is spot on, so it's very good for navigation. All right, you look at the goods Homocene map. This one used to be much more popular in our textbooks, but it's been replaced by the Winkle map. You know, it is torn, it's cut up. You know, you know, proportionally how close something is, proximity is really messed up in this one. But it's good for describing where things on land, right? Not so much in the sea, right? And then you have the Winkle, which is not the Robinson, but is the Winkle map. And that is very equally distributed. There's distortion everywhere, or all different types, but none of it is particularly egregious. None of it is particularly bad. So it's a good compromise map type. All right. Understanding absolute location is pretty important. Understanding coordinates, knowing that absolute location works, in a couple different ways. We'll get to this a little bit more later on, but understand again, you have parallels and you have meridians, you have latitude and longitude, so you might want to review that just a little bit. We look at astronomy as being kind of how we determine latitude and longitude. The Brits come up with this system, so they make themselves the center of the world and make the prime meridian running through Greenwich. So you'll see GMT sometimes, which means Greenwich Mean Time. Okay, there it is again a little bit more. You got your equator right here. You got your prime meridian right here. 180 degrees around is the international date line. We use this for absolute location. We use it a lot more. You just don't see it. Nobody describes where they're going in terms of absolute location unless you're looking at like a treasure map or something way out in the middle of the ocean. It doesn't really happen in everyday life. All right, types of maps. You're going to see a couple types of maps. You're going to have to recognize what they are. So these are our different types. We've got a reference map, choropleth map, dot distribution map, graduated symbol map, cartograms, topographic, and isoline. So we're going to look at those real fast. We're going to look at some of them, maybe not all of them. There's a choropleth map. Choropleth map uses coloring and shading to describe where things are, the frequency or density of something. The darker the place, generally speaking, the more of whatever we're discussing here. In this case, we're discussing turkeys. And the lighter the shade of whatever color scheme is in the map, generally the less something is. Right? You see a lot of choropleth maps in our book. Right? You might see a lot of dot maps too. Right? Dot maps, again, we look at placing something. Each dot represents here 2,000 cows. You put dots where 2,000 cows are, so you get to see the distribution of and the density of whatever we're talking about here. In this case, we're talking about cows that produce milk. All right, symbol map, again, fairly straightforward. You're using symbols, and sometimes they are graduated. They're bigger or smaller, depending to represent size. Here's a cartogram, which takes the shape but shrinks the size based on whatever we're talking about here. And in this case, we're talking about population. And then we have topographic maps, and they're more of a physical geography map, and they measure elevation, right? Or above sea level, right? How far something is above sea level. All right, on to place. Let's talk a little bit about place. We identify place by location. We have an idea of a sense of place in terms of what makes each spot unique. So let's think about that as we go through here. What makes Cottage Grove, for example, unique, right? So we identify place 4 ways. We identify location, right? Place name, site, situation, and absolute location. All right, so first of all, let's talk about place names. The technical word for a place name is toponym, what you name something, what it's called. We can talk a little bit about how we get into place names, but you're not necessarily going to have to know that for the test. So we'll skip some of that. But no, place names are a way of describing location. Keep in mind it can change, right? Places can change. Lake Bade-Magaska used to be called Lake Calhoun. Now it's called Bade-Magaska because it was named after Henry Calhoun, who was a slave owner and very pro-slavery. So that name has changed, right? So place names can change. Here's some toponyms, right, that are pretty funny. They are the funniest names of places in each state, right? And we look at Little Canada for Minnesota. All right, site and situation are our next two we're looking at. We'll start with site, which is the unique physical characteristics of a place. Keep in mind that can change. If you have a place that is on a hill, you can tear down that hill. You can blow up that hill with dynamite. You can move things around. So site can change. It's very difficult to change site factors, but it can be done. So think about what it looks like, smells like, feels like, sounds like, that type of thing. Site is also very cultural as well, right? So you can, you're smelling, the food of the ethnicity that lives there, or you're looking around, and you're seeing religious buildings like churches or mosques or something along those lines. right? Site is going to influence where you put something. If there's a favorable thing in that spot, then you put something there, right? You put a town there. Keep in mind it can be altered and again we're looking at that to benefit man. All right, so we look at Boston. Right, has changed. We look at Tokyo as having been changed. A lot of landfill, a lot of movement out into Tokyo Bay. Right, we look at Shanghai as moving as well. Right, and Chongming Island, right, is generally a built island. Right. Another way to look at it is situation. Situation also changes, right? So toponyms change, site changes, situation also change, right? So it is also known as relative location. Where is something relative to something else, right? So we describe Cottage Grove as being next to St. Paul Park and next to Woodbury and down the road from Hastings. And located on Highway 61. Keep in mind, Highway 61 wasn't always there, right? So situation can change, right? And we understand situation, it's good for describing unknown places where you're going. So it's good as a reference, but it's also good for describing the importance of a location. Like New Orleans is situated at the mouth of the Mississippi, right where the Gulf of Mexico and the Mississippi River come together, right? Minneapolis and St. Paul are situated where two rivers come together. You can think about many other places that it's next to something important. Every port city, right? Everything on a coast is situated next to an ocean, right? So that's important. So we see situation, right? Shanghai is located right at the mouth of the Yangtze River and where it meets the East China Sea. So that's pretty important. It's situated right there, right? Our fourth way to look at it is at location is absolute location, right? And this doesn't change. Absolute location doesn't change. So think about latitude and longitude. Street addresses work as well. They are a pretty decent another way to look at absolute location. The three other ways change, absolute location does not. Right, so latitude, longitude, coordinates, street addresses, they stay the same. All right, on to regions. Regions are an important concept in this class. You're going to be hearing about regions. We're going to be describing regions generally throughout our time in this class. So it's important to know what a region is, right? Define a region as an area defined by one or more distinctive traits, have something in common, right? They're sometimes difficult to define, sometimes they're pretty easy. The three types we're looking at here. And then keep in mind, places can belong to many regions, right? They can be formal regions that overlap. They overlap. Functional regions can overlap. Perceptual regions, you can belong to that as well as formal and functional regions. So they all like. So let's take a look at formal regions. Formal regions are areas that are uniform throughout, and you can find them easily on a map. So if you think about Park High School is located in the formal region of Cottage Grove. And is located in the county of Washington County. It is located in the formal region of Minnesota. It is located in the formal region of the United States. It is located in the formal region of North America. Okay, so you can have many different formal regions. They can overlap. Keep in mind they are uniform throughout, right? Doesn't matter what part of Cottage Grove you are in, you're still in Cottage Grove. All right, functional regions are also called nodal regions, and they experience something called distance decay. From where you're starting, there's a hearth, right, or a focal point or a node. So if we're looking at the Minnesota Vikings, right, the Minnesota Vikings fans, the further out you get from the US Bank Stadium or Minneapolis, the less likely you are to experience Vikings fans or to meet Vikings fans. You can see this in terms of fans. You can see this in terms of the market area of a place. So we look at this pizza place on your right, this map, where you see the star or the pizza place. You're less likely to get customers the further out you go from the pizza place. Okay. So there's another way of looking at functional regions. You can see again nodal regions, and this works well because it's got some chloroplethyn going on here. It's got some shading, right? And again, you see the distance decay happening here. The further out you get, the less twins territory you are in. All right. Third one we look at is vernacular regions, and these are also known as perceptual regions. These are things that, there's an idea of what they are, but there's no strong definition. So my idea of what the Twin Cities is might be different than your idea of what the Twin Cities is. Your idea of the Midwest might be very different than my idea of the Midwest. How far does the Midwest go? Where does it stop? Where does it end? What are its western boundaries? What are its eastern boundaries? All of those things. Right, and these are, people get very tied to these vernacular regions, right? Even though they're tied to kind of sense of place, they're tied to cultural attributes. So if I asked you to describe what Midwest people are like, what are some things that we all have in common, you might come up with these ideas, right? There's whole entire Twitter feeds that are designed to rally people together or to laugh at people from the Midwest, right? We're laughing at ourselves. Vernacular region, again, we look at the South, right? What is the South? Where does it stop? Where does it end? You could look at it as just as Confederate states, right? Or you could look at it as right to work states. That's a Southern attribute. Or the weather, climate, right? Like the last freeze, or when winter precipitation is higher than 21 inches. That might be a border. And there's some stereotypical things in here in terms of below average high school and college graduation rates. You see the Bible Belt in here as well. So an intense number of Baptists in the South compared to other parts of the United States. All right, again, we get into culture is our next big ticket item. Think of culture as a unique traditions that make a group unique. We talk about what we care about, ideas and beliefs and values, and what we take care of in terms of kind of the physical aspects of culture. Physical aspects of culture are, they're easily recognizable. The ideas, beliefs, and values are what's underneath. So they're a little trickier, right? So what you can see about another culture is kind of a tip of the iceberg, and there are so many subtle nuances, cultural traits and complexes that go on beneath that. Right. More importantly for your test, though, is looking at cultural ecology and how we are impacted by our environment. And there are two conflicting theories out there: environmental determinism and then possibilism. All right, environmental determinism is old school. It's not very well thought of these days. It's kind of outdated and antiquated. And it basically says that our culture is impacted by our environment, and it's determined by our environment, and not the other way around. We don't determine things. Our nature and all the climate and all of those things, they force our culture, right? The opposite of that, and the more respected and modern take on this, is something called possibilism. And that says it is possible for humans to change their environment to make their cultural things happen, right? So know the difference between those two. They were part of your vocabulary, so they may appear in a test question, they may appear on your vocabulary as well. Right? Understanding scale, local to global. Understanding that things in your local environment might be affected by global things is pretty important. So big term here, globalization, right? It's kind of the shrinking of the world. It's good and bad. Globalization is a hot button topic these days. We talk about technology and transportation systems being greatly increasing, right? That we have shrunk. So we talk about the time-space compression. We have shrunk, the shrinking of the world, that you can play video games, with somebody in Australia. They can be part of your alliance or your clan or something along those lines. You can shoot them online. You're buying clothes from all over the world. Very few of your clothes are made in the United States. So there's cultural things going on. There's cultural globalization and there's economic globalization, right? So think about McDonald's as being kind of a good combination of those, right? That the cultural part of food, right? But then also the money making, the domination of the McDonald's corporation as well. Right. What we see here is we see specialization on a local level. We see a difference, like transnational corporations has increased the amount of disparity between rich and poor people. So it's not altogether a great thing economically, but it does get us very cheap goods, and we get all sorts of different imported foods. And so there are some wonderful things that go with globalization as well. Cheap imported goods really are very helpful to the American economy. All right, again, we look at culture as well, the second part of it, and we see standardized landscapes where everything looks like, everybody dresses the same, blue jeans are all over the world, things like that, right? And we see cultural, folk culture traditions being threatened by cultural imperialism and things like that. All right, another big thing we got to talk about is distribution, which is how things are arranged across an area of space. All right, a couple properties we look at here are density, concentration, and pattern. Density is how much or how frequent something exists within a particular space. We also look at concentration, right? How is something, not just how much of it is there, but how is it spread out? Is it clustered? Is whatever we're talking about all in one spot? Or is it spread out and dispersed? So those are a couple things that you're going to definitely have to know for the test. And then we look at pattern too, right? Streets are, organic patterns, but we also then have geometric, kind of laid out streets and design, city planning, all of those things as well follow patterns. All right. One of the best examples of patterns within distribution is something called the Land Ordinance of 1785. There's a small blurb about that. It's a small but important blurb in the book. You should maybe review that. But what it does is it divides the new territories, and think kind of west of the Appalachian Mountains, into a manageable grid so it can be sold to frontier people, right, who are Americans who are pushing west. We have a township and a range system. And we think of this as almost absolute location in a lot of ways because it has a coordinate system. It's similar to latitude and longitude, and it helps break up property into manageable things. But what we see then is we see a square-like pattern throughout the landscape, particularly if we are looking down at it from space, right? Like here, we're looking down at it from space in here, right? And here, a map, we are also kind of looking down at it from space too, right? And we can definitely see this right in Minnesota, right in Adrian, Minnesota on I-90, and we see all of these grid-like patterns, right? We see roads operating at about a mile away. Right, you can see this generally speaking. You'll see a lot of our major roads, even in Cottage Grove and Woodbury and other places, as being about a mile apart. Right, and that's not a coincidence. Generally speaking, they're going to be kind of borders of township and range systems. All right, again, you see this on a metro scale. You see this in terms of how our counties are broken up. Keep in mind that they're not all perfect squares because we have a lot of lakes and things like there. We have a river system running through here, so it's not always perfect, but it does work pretty well. All right, diffusion is our next big thing. How is something spread, right? An idea or a product, something along those lines. Hearth is a good word to know. That is the point of origin, the hearth of pizza or something along those lines. The hearth of Target would be Minneapolis, right? Its point of origin, right? The hearth of Islam would be Mecca. The hearth of Christianity would be modern day Israel, Palestine in there. All right, so we think of different types of diffusion. We have relocation diffusion. These are your big ticket items. These are things like language and religion and ethnicity. These are things that you take with you. So if you moved to Brazil tomorrow, you wouldn't stop knowing the English language. It would come with you, right? Your religion probably wouldn't change. You wouldn't automatically convert to another religion, right? Your ethnicity is your ethnicity, right? That's not something that changes within you. Um, and then our second way of looking at diffusion is expansion diffusion, right? And the most important version of expansion diffusion, right? And we look at a snowballing process, right? Kind of a snowball. You understand what a snowballing process is, right? It goes down the hill. It starts small and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Hierarchical diffusion is a good example of expansion diffusion, and this comes from places of authority and power, right? Fashion trends are our best example, right? So New York City and Paris and Milan and Tokyo and London. These are, and now Hollywood, right, is also a position of power when it comes to fashion trends. They are the ones; those are where the big fashion shows are. They are the ones who are where clothing is being designed, not necessarily being made there, but is being designed there. And they're the ones who determine what is in and what is out when it comes to cut and make and color and all of those things. Um, Contagious diffusion, right, is again kind of disease spread. You know, you have a COVID-19 example that you can look at. You can see how things go viral on the internet as well. You know, and then we look at stimulus diffusion. And stimulus diffusion is pretty interesting. It basically means, you know, if there wasn't Facebook, there wouldn't be Snapchat, something along those lines. If there wasn't old IBM computers, then there wouldn't be old Apple computers. And if there wasn't old Apple computers, then there wouldn't be PCs. And if there wasn't PCs, then there wouldn't be kind of modern Chromebooks and MacBooks and stuff like that. All right, relocation diffusion. Again, you see religion, right, as a big ticket item. The hearth of various religions, and then the diffusion of followers from there, right? Again, we look at contagious diffusion as well when it comes to the plague. We look at hierarchical diffusion in terms of the United States being kind of the hearth of TVs, and then we see that expanding over from 1954 to 1970, and then we see it spread kind of on a global scale by 2005 that there's TVs most places. That is it. Good luck studying. I hope this helps. Take care and good luck.